Hi, and welcome back to Reddit Whispers. The last day of a man's working life is supposed to feel like a summit. You've spent 45 years climbing the same mountain, some days in blinding blizzards, others in the warm sun, but always putting one foot in front of the other. And now you're there, standing on the peak, the wind at your back with the whole wide, beautiful landscape of the rest of your life stretching out before you. That was how I felt. My name is Arthur, and for 45 years I had been a structural welder. I built the skeletons of things, bridges that spanned impossible gaps, skyscrapers that scraped the clouds. It was hard, honest work. It was loud, hot, and it had etched itself into my body. The web of fine white scars on my forearms, the permanent stiffness in my left shoulder, the calluses on my hands so thick they felt like leather. I wasn't just proud of the work, I was proud of what it had built for me and my wife, Serafina. Our life was a fortress of practicality, built on a foundation of delayed gratification. For 20 years, every paycheck, every overtime hour, every holiday bonus had been meticulously divided. A portion for the bills, a portion for living, and the lion's share, the seed corn for our future, went into the account we simply called the dream. The dream was a tangible thing. It lived in a dog-eared travel brochure on our nightstand, the page for a small, salt-sprayed cottage on the Oregon coast held open by a seashell we'd found on a rare vacation years ago. The dream was the smell of sea air, the sound of gulls, and the promise of mornings with no alarm clock, just the rhythmic crash of waves on the shore. It was a shared vision that had fueled us through every sacrifice. We'd driven the same reliable, unglamorous car for 15 years. Our vacations were camping trips, not cruises. We patched our clothes, we cooked at home, we turned down expensive dinners with friends. We weren't misers, we were investors. We were investing in time, in peace, in a final, golden chapter that would make all the lean ones worthwhile. Serafina was the artist to my artisan. Where I saw blueprints and stress tolerances, she saw color and light. She painted, mostly watercolors of landscapes that were far more beautiful and serene than the gray industrial city we lived in. She'd had to put her art on the back burner, of course. She worked as a receptionist at a dental office, a steady, respectable job that helped keep the foundations of our plan solid. But her artistic soul was the why behind the dream. I wanted to give her a life where she could paint the sea not from a photograph, but from her own front porch. I wanted to see her hands, free from the receptionist's keyboard, stained with ultramarine and cadmium yellow instead. My final act of building would be to construct her perfect world. My last day at the fabrication yard was a blur of handshakes, backslaps, and a sheet cake with "Happy Retirement" art written in wobbly blue icing. My crew gave me a beautiful handcrafted fly fishing rod. They were good men. They understood the language of hard work and the value of a promise kept. As I drove home, the familiar weight of my steel-toed boots feeling strangely light, a profound sense of satisfaction washed over me. We had done it. We had reached the summit. Serafina had planned a quiet celebration for just the two of us, a good bottle of wine, steaks on the grill. When I walked in, she hugged me, her face buried in my shoulder. She felt smaller, more fragile than I remembered. I chalked it up to the emotion of the moment, the culmination of 2 decades of shared striving. She was radiant that evening. She talked animatedly about packing lists and which of her paintings we should hang over the fireplace in the new cottage. She was happy. Seeing her like that, her eyes sparkling with the reflection of the candlelight, made every single sacrifice worth it. Later that night, after she had gone to bed, I stayed up. I was too wired, too full of a quiet, triumphant energy. I poured myself a small glass of whiskey and sat at our small kitchen table. The house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. On an impulse, a desire to look upon the fruits of our labor one last time before it was converted into reality, I decided to log into our joint savings account, the Dream account. I opened my laptop, the screen illuminating my face in the dark room. I navigated to the bank's website, my fingers moving with a familiar, happy rhythm. I typed in the username and the password we'd chosen together 20 years ago, Oregon Cottage 22. I clicked enter and waited for the page to load, a wide, proud smile on my face. I was ready to see the number, the beautiful six-figure number that represented a lifetime of sweat and discipline. The page loaded. My smile froze, then slowly dissolved. I blinked, then blinked again. I thought it was a mistake, a glitch in the system. The number on the screen was wrong. It wasn't a summit. It was a pothole. It was a tiny, pitiful fraction of what was supposed to be there. Less than $5,000. My first thought was that I had been hacked, that some anonymous digital thief had siphoned away our future. A cold, sharp panic began to prickle at the edges of my consciousness. I clicked on the transaction history, my heart hammering against my ribs. I scrolled down, expecting to see a massive, unauthorized withdrawal. But I didn't. What I saw was worse. It was a death by 1,000 cuts, a methodical, relentless bleed. Every month, for years, a transfer. It started small, a few $100s here and there, but as the years went on, the amounts grew. 1,000, then 2, then 5. The withdrawals were regular, almost like a bill being paid. And they were all going to the same recipient, Ethel Red's Arts Foundation. I stared at the name. Ethel. It sounded like something out of an old English poem. It meant nothing to me. I had never heard Serafina mention it. It wasn't a gallery she admired or a charity we supported. It was a complete and total mystery. I scrolled back, my mind racing. The withdrawals dated back nearly a decade of steady, secret erosion, while I was working overtime, welding in the rain and the blistering sun, thinking I was building our dream on a rock-solid foundation. But the foundation was sand, and the tide had been going out for a very long time. I sat there in the dark, the glow of the screen painting a ghastly light on my face, and the silence of the house became a roar in my ears. I didn't feel anger, not yet. I felt a profound, cavernous emptiness, as if the entire internal structure of my life, the beams and girders of my marriage, had just been vaporized, leaving me suspended in a terrifying void. Every shared smile, every knowing glance, every quiet word of encouragement over the past 10 years was now recast in this horrific new light. Our dream hadn't been a shared dream. It had been my dream. She had been funding something else entirely. I closed the laptop with a quiet click that sounded like a gunshot in the silent house. I looked at the brochure on the counter, at the smiling couple walking on the beach in front of the perfect cottage. They were strangers. Their life was a fantasy. I walked to the window and looked out at the dark, sleeping street. I was supposed to be a man on the verge of his reward. Instead, I was a man who had just realized he had been robbed, and the thief was sleeping peacefully in his bed just one room away. And the scariest part, the part that turned my blood to ice, was that I had absolutely no idea why. The next morning, I woke up before dawn, the whiskey having offered no sleep, only a dull headache. I looked at Serafina, sleeping beside me, her face calm and untroubled. The intimacy of the image, once a source of comfort, was now a grotesque violation. I was sharing a bed with a stranger, a woman who had orchestrated a decade-long financial conspiracy behind my back. The urge to wake her, to scream the name Ethelred in her face, was a physical force I had to suppress with every ounce of my will. But I couldn't, not yet. A confrontation without information was just noise. I needed to understand the shape and size of the monster that had devoured our life before I could even think about how to fight it. So I began to act. I made coffee, just like I did every morning. When she came into the kitchen, smiling and refreshed, talking about needing to buy more packing boxes, I smiled back. It was the hardest piece of metal I had ever had to weld into place. I told her I had a few things to wrap up with my union pension and that I'd handle the final call to the bank. It was a lie, but it bought me the one thing I needed: time. As soon as she left for a final celebratory lunch with her coworkers, another lie I now suspected, my investigation began. I sat down at the laptop, no longer a happy retiree, but a forensic accountant of my own ruin. I typed Aethelred Arts Foundation into the search engine. The results bloomed on the screen. It was a real organization, a nonprofit dedicated to supporting unconventional and emerging artists. Their website was sleek and minimalist, filled with photos of abstract sculptures and stark, challenging paintings. It was a world away from Serafina's gentle watercolors of seascapes and forests. The About Us page listed a board of directors, a collection of wealthy-looking individuals with names that sounded like old money. The founder and chairman was a man named Julian Croft. His photo showed a man in his late 60s, with a mane of silver hair, a tailored suit, and an expression of smug, artistic authority. I spent an hour scouring the website, a cold dread coiling in my stomach. I found donor lists, press releases, and photo galleries from their annual fundraising galas. The galas were opulent affairs. People in tuxedos and evening gowns, sipping champagne, surrounded by art that was meant to look profound. I clicked through the photos, my cursor moving like a Ouija board planchette. At first, it was just a sea of unfamiliar, wealthy faces. And then, I stopped. My breath caught in my throat. It was her. It was Serafina. But it wasn't the Serafina I knew. This woman was wearing a sleek black evening gown, her hair swept up in an elegant style I had never seen. She was holding a champagne flute, laughing with a confidence that was utterly foreign to me. She was standing next to Julian Croft, her hand resting comfortably on his arm. The caption beneath the photo read, "Foundation Chairman Julian Croft with Sarah Croft, Head of Acquisitions." Sarah Croft, not Serafina, just Sarah. And his last name, not hers, not ours. I felt a wave of nausea so intense I had to grip the edge of the table. She wasn't just a donor, she was on the board, Head of Acquisitions. It was a title, a position, a whole other life. She had a different name, different friends, a different version of herself that existed in a parallel universe funded by my sweat and my overtime. The rabbit hole went deeper. I started searching for Sarah Croft. I found articles in local arts magazines, interviews on obscure blogs. She was a respected figure in this little world, a patron with a keen eye for emerging talent. The interviews were chilling. She spoke of feeling stifled in her early life, of being married to a simple, practical man who couldn't understand the necessities of the soul. She never used my name. I was just a vague, gray archetype, a footnote in the story of her glorious artistic blossoming. The money, I now understood, wasn't just for donations. It was for this life. The gowns, the galas, the travel to art fairs in other cities. It was the price of admission into a world where she could be Sarah, not just Serafina, the receptionist married to the welder. The betrayal was no longer just financial. It was a fundamental repudiation of our entire life together, of the man I was. She hadn't just stolen our money. She had used it to purchase a new identity, one that was built on the ashes of her respect for me. The final piece of the puzzle required me to move from the digital world to the physical one. We had a small spare room that Serafina used as her studio. It was the one place in the house that was exclusively hers. She always kept it locked when she wasn't in there, saying she needed to protect her creative space from disruption. I had always respected that. I saw it as a quaint artistic quirk. Now, I saw it as the locked door to her secret life. I went to my toolbox in the garage, my hands moving with a grim purpose. I was a man who knew how to build things, but I also knew how to take them apart. A thin piece of steel, a little tension, and the lock on the studio door clicked open in under a minute. The room I entered was not the one I had imagined. I expected to see her familiar easel, the watercolors of the sea, the gentle landscapes. That was all there, pushed into a corner, covered by a dust sheet. The rest of the room was an office, a shrine to Sarah Croft. There was a sleek modern desk I'd never seen before, a different laptop. On a corkboard on the wall were invitations to gallery openings, backstage passes to art installations, and photos. Dozens of photos. Sarah, with Julian. Sarah laughing with Julian at a restaurant. Sarah on a boat with Julian, the wind in her hair. They weren't just colleagues. The way he looked at her, the way her body leaned into his, it was an intimacy that screamed from the glossy prints. In the closet, I found not her simple painting smocks, but a collection of designer dresses and expensive shoes. In a locked file cabinet, which I also opened with little difficulty, I found the truth of the Aethelred Arts Foundation. It wasn't just a nonprofit, it was a business. Julian and Sarah were partners. They would use foundation money to buy art from emerging artists at a low price, display it at a foundation event to generate buzz, and then privately sell it at an inflated price to wealthy collectors, pocketing the difference. It was a clever, cynical, and likely illegal scheme. Our retirement fund, my 45 years of hard labor, had been the seed money for their art world scam. The final discovery was a leather-bound journal on her desk. My hands trembled as I opened it. Her familiar handwriting filled the pages. I didn't read it all. I couldn't. But I read enough. I read about her boredom, her resentment of our small gray life. I read about meeting Julian, how he saw the real her, how he unlocked her spirit. She wrote about me with a cool, detached pity. Arthur is a good man, she had written in one entry, like a sturdy old workhorse, reliable, strong, but utterly lacking in imagination. He is content in his small field, never realizing there is a whole world beyond the fence. That was it. That was the line that broke me. Workhorse, a beast of burden, good for one thing, pulling the plow that tilled the fields of her real life. The anger finally came then. It was a cold, white-hot fury that burned away the shock and the grief. It was the fury of a man who realizes he hasn't just been lied to, he has been utterly disdained, his life's work treated as nothing more than fuel for someone else's fire. I closed the journal. I put everything back exactly as I had found it. I relocked the door. I walked back into the living room, the heart of the life we had supposedly built together, and I saw it all for the sham it was. The comfortable armchair, the photos of us smiling on camping trips, the hand-knitted Afghan on the sofa. It was a stage set, and the play was over. A different man might have waited for her to come home. He might have screamed and thrown things and demanded answers. He might have dragged her into the secret room and forced her to confront the wreckage. But I am a welder. I don't scream at broken structures. I assess the damage, I find the stress fractures, and I plan a controlled demolition. Her performance, her entire identity as Sarah Croft, was built on the foundation of my work and my ignorance. A loud, messy divorce would be her stage. She would play the victim, the misunderstood artist escaping a suffocating marriage. Julian, with his money and influence, would protect her. I would be cast as the villain, the simple-minded workhorse who finally bolted. I decided I would not give her that satisfaction. I would not play a role in her drama. I would simply disappear. I would deny her a final act. I would let her world collapse under the weight of its own lies, without my anger to serve as its convenient scapegoat. I spent the next 2 days in a state of hyper-focused clarity. While she was out buying those packing boxes for a trip we would never take, I was moving. I opened a new bank account at a different institution. I methodically sold off the few assets that were in my name only, some old tools, a collection of antique fishing lures, and deposited the cash. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I packed a single, rugged duffel bag, not with the new retirement clothes we'd bought, but with my old work jeans, flannel shirts, and my worn leather boots. The uniform of the man I actually was. I went through our shared photo albums. With the precision of a surgeon, I removed every picture of myself. I left her with a history of one, a collection of photos of a woman smiling alone in forests, by lakes, in front of national monuments. The final morning was a masterpiece of surreal tranquility. The day we were supposed to load up the car and drive toward the sunrise over the Oregon coast. Serafina was practically vibrating with excitement. She made a special breakfast, chattering on about the first thing she would paint when we got there. I sat across from her, sipping my coffee, nodding and smiling. I was a ghost at my own farewell breakfast. After we ate, I told her I needed to make one last run to the dump to get rid of some old junk from the garage. She smiled, oblivious. "Don't take too long, darling," she said. "Our new life is waiting." "I won't," I said. And it was the only true thing I had said to her in 2 days. I went into the garage. I didn't get rid of junk. I got into my old pickup truck, the one I was supposed to sell, the one she called that rusty old thing. It was paid for, it was in my name, and it was as reliable as the man who drove it. Before I started the engine, I performed my final act. I walked back into the house. She was in the bedroom, humming as she packed. On the polished surface of the dining room table, the table where we had shared thousands of meals, I placed a single, plain manila envelope. Inside, I did not put an angry letter. There were no accusations, no questions, no pleas for an explanation. Words were her world, a world of lies and justifications. My world was one of tangible, undeniable facts. So that's what I left her. The envelope contained 4 items. First, a single printed-out statement from the Dream account showing the final pathetic balance of $4,781.22. Second, a glossy 8x10 print of the photo I had found online, her as Sarah on the arm of Julian Croft at the Foundation Gala. Third, a quitclaim deed I had a notary sign the day before, relinquishing all my rights to the house. It was her stage. She could have it. The final item was the key to her secret studio. I left the envelope perfectly centered on the table. I walked out of the house, closed the door quietly behind me, and got into my truck. I started the engine. The familiar rumbling growl was the sound of my own life starting over. I didn't look back at the house as I pulled away from the curb. I drove not west towards the sea, but north towards the mountains, with no destination in mind other than away. The first few months were a blur of cheap motels and greasy spoon diners. I drove until the city was a distant memory, until the landscape was dominated by pine trees and granite peaks. I ended up in a small town in northern Montana, a place built on logging and self-reliance. I got a job at a small fabrication shop, welding frames for custom machinery. The work was familiar, grounding. The heat of the torch, the smell of burning metal, the satisfaction of a perfect bead. It was a language I understood. I lived simply. I rented a small cabin on the edge of town. I bought new tools. I went fishing with the rod my crew had given me. I didn't try to make friends, not at first. But the quiet nods of respect from the men I worked with were enough. They didn't ask about my past, and I didn't offer it. I was just Art, the quiet guy who was hell with a TIG welder. For over a year, I resisted the urge to look back. I didn't search her name or his or the foundation. Her world was no longer my concern. My life was about the tangible things I could see and touch. The solid weld, the tug of a trout on the line, the warmth of the fire in my wood stove. I was slowly rebuilding my own internal structure, not with plans or dreams, but with the simple day-to-day reality of a life honestly lived. But curiosity is a persistent ghost. One evening, sitting in my cabin with the snow falling silently outside, I typed the name of the Athelred Arts Foundation into my phone's browser. What I found was not a sleek website for a thriving arts organization. I found a series of explosive news articles. The foundation had collapsed in a storm of scandal. An investigative journalist had uncovered a massive fraud and money laundering scheme. Donors had been bilked out of millions. The articles painted Julian Croft as a charismatic sociopath who had used the art world as his personal piggy bank. He was facing a raft of federal charges. And then I saw her name, Sarah Croft. She was named as his co-conspirator. The articles detailed her role, her secret life, her complicity in the entire scheme. One article included a recent photo of her leaving a courthouse, flanked by lawyers. The confident, radiant woman from the gala was gone. This woman looked thin, haunted, and a decade older. Her name, the name she had invented to escape our life, was now permanently linked to disgrace and criminality. I read it all with a strange sense of detachment. There was no joy, no triumphant feeling of vengeance. There was only a quiet, profound sadness. Her grand dream, the world for which she had sacrificed our life, had been just as hollow as our retirement account. It was a structure built on a corrupt foundation, and it had collapsed just as all poorly built things eventually do. I closed the browser. I looked around my small, warm cabin. It wasn't the salt-sprayed cottage from the brochure. There was no ocean outside my window. But the walls were solid, the roof didn't leak, and everything inside it was mine, bought and paid for with my own two honest hands. The workhorse had found his own field, and he was, for the first time in a very long time, content. Thanks for being here on Reddit Whispers. I've shared my story, but now I want to hear yours. What's the most surprising decision that turned everything around for you? Your comment could be the lifeline someone else is looking for today.